Picture this. You're scrolling through dating apps, swiping left and right, hoping to find someone who actually responds with more than one word. Meanwhile, centuries ago, Native American tribes had courtship systems so elegant, so emotionally intelligent, that modern romance looks like amateur hour. No awkward first dates at coffee shops, no ghosting, no "what are we" conversations that go nowhere. Instead, they had something far more sophisticated, a web of rituals, community involvement and emotional honesty that turned love into both an art form and a community celebration. They understood something we've forgotten, that desire isn't just physical attraction, and love isn't just a private matter between two people. Let me take you to a Lakota village in the Great Plains, autumn of 1823. The air smells like wood smoke and dried prairie grass. Young warriors return from a successful hunt, their horses heavy with buffalo meat. Among them is Chaska, 22 years old, lean and strong, with eyes that scan the village not for glory, but for one person. Her name is Winona. She's 19, graceful, known throughout the village for her beadwork and her quiet intelligence. She stands near her family's lodge, pretending not to notice Chaska's arrival, though her heart beats faster. But here's where it gets interesting. Chaska can't just walk up to her and ask her out. That would be considered disrespectful, even crude. Among the Lakota and most Plains tribes, courtship followed a deliberate pattern that required patience, creativity, and genuine emotional investment. First came the silent courtship phase. For weeks, Chaska had been finding subtle ways to be near Winona. Not creepily, the community watched everything. He'd position himself where she drew water, where she gathered firewood, always at a respectful distance. He'd help her younger brothers with their hunting practice. He'd leave small gifts near her family's lodge, a perfectly carved bone needle, a bundle of sweet grass, a soft rabbit pelt. Winona knew these came from him. Everyone knew. But the game required discretion, required proof that desire could be patient, that attraction could coexist with respect. Then came the flute. Among the Lakota and many Plains tribes, young men courted with music. Not just any music, a specific melody played on a handcrafted wooden flute, usually cedar, hollowed and carved during winter months when a young man realized his heart had chosen someone. On a cool evening, as purple light faded over the prairie, Chaska stood at a distance from Winona's lodge and played. The melody was haunting, slow, filled with longing, but also promise. It said without words, "I see you. I value you. I'm willing to wait." Inside the lodge, Winona's mother smiled. Her father listened carefully, judging not just the music, but the character it revealed. Was this young man patient? Did he play with genuine feeling or just technique? The flute courtship could last weeks, sometimes months. Every evening, Chaska would return, playing variations of the same melody, each version revealing more of his heart. But there's something crucial to understand here. This wasn't just romantic. It was communal evaluation. Elders watched. Families discussed. The community assessed whether this match made sense not just emotionally, but practically, socially, spiritually. Because among Native American tribes, love was never purely individual. It was a thread in the fabric of the whole community, affecting alliances, labor distribution, childcare networks, ceremonial responsibilities. After several weeks of flute courtship, if Winona's family approved and she herself was interested, the next phase began, the blanket courtship. On a designated evening, Chaska would arrive at Winona's family lodge carrying his finest buffalo robe. He'd wait outside respectfully until invited to enter. Inside, with her parents and often other family members present, he'd sit across from Winona, and if she consented, they'd both wrap themselves in the robe, creating a private space within the communal one. Underneath that blanket, they could finally talk. Really talk. Not about the weather or trivial things, but about their dreams, their fears, their visions for life. They'd discuss how they saw their future, what kind of parents they wanted to be, how they'd contribute to the tribe, what their spiritual beliefs were. This could last hours. Her family would be right there, a few feet away, maintaining the boundary between intimacy and propriety. They couldn't see the couple's faces, couldn't hear the whispered words, but their presence ensured that desire remained channeled through respect. And here's what's brilliant about this system. It forced emotional honesty before physical escalation. They had to actually know each other, had to build genuine intellectual and spiritual connection before the relationship could deepen. Modern dating often does the opposite. Physical first, emotional maybe later. The Lakota understood that lasting love required the reverse. Over several blanket courtship sessions, Chaska and Winona discovered they shared a vision. They both wanted to live near the river bend where wild plums grew, wanted 4 children, valued generosity as the highest virtue, believed in the importance of the sun dance ceremony. They also discovered their fears. Chaska worried he wouldn't be a good enough provider. Winona feared she wouldn't be a strong enough mother. They shared these vulnerabilities, not as weaknesses but as truths, and in doing so built a foundation of trust that physical attraction alone could never create. After multiple sessions, if both families agreed and the couple felt ready, the formal proposal process began. Chaska had to prove his worth through gifts: horses, buffalo robes he'd hunted and tanned himself, tools he'd crafted, and most importantly, his labor. He'd spend days helping Winona's father, helping her brothers, helping her mother. This wasn't buying a bride. It was demonstrating through action that he understood marriage as reciprocal obligation, as service, as the interweaving of 2 family economies into one stronger whole. This entire process, from first flute song to marriage ceremony, could take a full year or more. A year of patience, observation, gradual revelation, and community integration. Compare that to modern relationships, where people move in together after a few months of dating, barely knowing each other's real values, their conflict patterns, their long-term visions. The Lakota way was slower, yes, but it was also wiser. It filtered out infatuation masquerading as love. It required desire to mature into respect. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because understanding how Native Americans navigated love with such emotional sophistication will challenge everything you thought you knew about romance. Here's something nobody tells you about Native American approaches to desire. They didn't suppress it. They didn't shame it. They understood it as a natural force, like hunger or thirst, that required wisdom to channel rather than rules to contain. Among the Cherokee, there was a specific word, duyukta, that described the particular longing one person feels for another, a yearning that lived in the chest and the belly simultaneously, physical and emotional fused into one ache. Let's talk about how different tribes created frameworks for sexual and romantic desire that acknowledged its power while protecting individuals and community stability. Among the Hopi of the Southwest, young people participated in ritual dances where desire was expressed openly but within sacred structure. During the butterfly dance, young women wore traditional dresses with elaborate embroidery. Young men, faces painted, bodies adorned with shells and feathers, danced with an energy that was unambiguously sensual. The dance itself was a form of flirtation, of display, of mutual assessment. Bodies moved in rhythms that echoed older private rhythms. Eyes met, held, communicated entire conversations without words. But here's the key. This was supervised desire. Elders watched. The context was ceremonial, which meant sacred, which meant boundaries existed even within expression. Young people could explore attraction, could feel the electricity of mutual interest, but within a container that prevented impulsive action from derailing lives. The Hopi understood that desire needed pathways, needed contexts where it could be acknowledged without becoming destructive. But what about when desire pointed towards someone unavailable, when attraction challenged existing commitments? Among the Iroquois Confederacy, marriage was valued but not considered an absolute prison. If a partnership wasn't working, if love had genuinely died, divorce was possible and carried no shame. More importantly, the Iroquois had sophisticated protocols for addressing attraction outside of marriage. If someone felt drawn to another person while already partnered, the expectation wasn't to pretend the feeling didn't exist. It was to be honest about it. Let me show you how this worked through the story of Onata and Hento, a married Mohawk couple in their late 20s, parents of 2 young children, living in a longhouse village around 1780. During a summer gathering with a neighboring village, Onata found herself powerfully drawn to Adahi, a visiting trader. The attraction was immediate, undeniable, and deeply confusing. She loved Hento. She valued their partnership. Yet here was this pull towards someone else. After days of internal struggle, she did something that would seem shocking to modern Western sensibilities. She told Hento the truth. "I need to speak honestly with you about something difficult. I felt an attraction to the trader Adahi. This feeling confuses me because I love you and value our life together, but the feeling exists, and I don't want to hide it from you." Hento didn't explode in rage or jealousy. The Iroquois understanding of desire didn't frame it as a zero-sum game where attraction to someone else automatically meant the death of existing love. Instead, Hento asked questions. "Do you want to leave our marriage? Do you feel something is missing between us? Or is this simply an attraction, a passing desire that surprised you?" They talked for hours, not with anger, but with emotional honesty that was expected in Iroquois partnerships. They discussed what the attraction might be revealing. Were their needs not being met? Had their partnership become too routine? They concluded that raising young children had indeed reduced the romantic and sexual energy between them. Their partnership had become primarily functional. So they made a plan to prioritize their intimate connection again, to remember that they were lovers and not just co-parents, to rebuild the fire that first brought them together. The Iroquois framework allowed for that honest conversation. Desire wasn't treated as a thought crime. It was treated as information, as a potential signal that something needed attention. Among the Navajo, there was a concept called hojo, often translated as harmony or balance. This wasn't just a vague spiritual idea, it was a practical framework for living, including for navigating the complexities of desire. Hojo meant that your desires, sexual, romantic, emotional, should exist in balance with your responsibilities to family, clan, and community. It meant that passion was good, but not if it destroyed other people. A young Navajo person learning about relationships would be taught, desire is natural, attraction is part of being human, but wisdom means understanding when to act on desire and when to let it pass. This wasn't repression, it was emotional maturity. There's a story told among the Navajo about a young man consumed with desire for a woman who was already married. He went to a respected elder, a Hatali, traditional healer, seeking help. The Hatali didn't tell him his desire was sinful. Instead, he asked, "What does this desire teach you about yourself? What is it you're really seeking?" Through conversations and ceremonies, the young man realized his obsessive desire wasn't really about the woman at all. It was about his own fear of inadequacy. Once he understood this, the obsession lost its power. This is the sophistication we're talking about. This is emotional intelligence that treats desire as neither God nor demon, but as a messenger carrying information about the self. Not every love story among Native American tribes ended with harmony. Not every desire led to fulfillment, and not every heartbreak was handled with wisdom. Let me take you to a Comanche band in the Southern Plains, summer of 1835. Among them is Keme, a warrior of 25 married to Tua, a woman he chose 3 years ago. Their marriage started passionate, intense, full of fire. But over time, that fire had begun to burn differently, sometimes threatening to consume everything around it. The problem was simple and ancient. Keme's jealousy. Tua was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was charismatic. In Comanche culture, women had significant autonomy. They owned property, could initiate divorce, participated in decision-making. Tua embodied this freedom fully, but Keme struggled with insecurity. Every time another man spoke to Tua for more than a moment, every time she laughed at someone else's joke, Keme felt a twist in his gut he couldn't control. He'd demand explanations. "Why were you talking to Nahuel so long? What did Enepe say to make you laugh like that?" The elders noticed. Tua's grandmother, Adsila, approached her during a day when the women were processing buffalo hides. "Your marriage is struggling," Adsila said simply. "He doesn't trust me. I've given him no reason for distrust, but he suspects me constantly." "Jealousy is fear wearing a mask of anger," Adsila said. "What is he afraid of?" That I'll leave him, that I don't really love him? And the tragedy is that his jealousy will create exactly what he fears. No woman can breathe with a hand around her throat. That evening, Tua spoke to Kem with clarity. I love you. I chose you. But I will not live in a cage of your jealousy. You must decide if you can trust me or not. If you cannot, then we should end this marriage now. The directness shocked Keme. Among the Comanche, men had access to mentorship from elders. Keme sought out his uncle, Takoda. I'm afraid I'm losing her, Keme admitted, and the more afraid I become, the tighter I hold, and the more she pulls away. Love cannot live in a closed fist, Takoda said. When you grasp too tight, you crush what you're trying to hold. But how do I stop being afraid? You're afraid because you don't believe you're worthy of her choice, so you try to control her instead of becoming the man she'd freely choose every day. Through conversations, Keme began the hard work of changing. He caught himself before demanding explanations. He noticed his jealous thoughts and questioned them. He worked on building his sense of self-worth. It wasn't smooth, he backslid. There were arguments, but slowly things shifted. Their marriage didn't return to early passion. Instead, it deepened into something more sustainable, mutual respect, genuine affection, and hard-won trust. But not all stories ended this way. Let me tell you about Ayita and Chaitan, a Cherokee couple who married young, both 17, driven by intense physical attraction. For the first year they were inseparable, consumed with each other. But as the intensity faded, they discovered something painful. They didn't actually like each other very much. Their values were different. Ayita cared deeply about community contribution, about ceremony. Chaitan was more pragmatic, focused on material success. Ayita wanted children soon. Chaitan wanted to wait. They argued constantly. After 2 years of struggle, Ayita initiated the traditional Cherokee divorce process. She placed Chaitan's belongings outside their home. The divorce was sad, but clean. The Cherokee system divided assets fairly and allowed both parties to move forward. Within a year, both had remarried to better-suited partners. This raises something important: the willingness to acknowledge mistakes and correct them. Many Native American cultures took a different view than European colonial cultures. Marriage was sacred, yes, but not more sacred than human well-being. If a partnership wasn't working, ending it with respect and dignity was better than forcing people to stay in emotional prisons. Now I want you to comment with this exact phrase if this resonates with you. I wish we still had this wisdom, because the Native American understanding that some marriages should end, that divorce isn't failure, but sometimes wisdom. That's something we need to remember. Here's something that might make you uncomfortable. Native American cultures didn't separate sexuality from spirituality the way European Christianity did. The body wasn't fallen. Desire wasn't sin. Sexual pleasure wasn't shameful. Instead, many tribes understood human sexuality as one expression of the sacred creative force that flowed through all of nature. Among the Cherokee, the green corn ceremony included married couples renewing their commitments. But the renewal wasn't just spiritual platitudes. It included explicit acknowledgement of sexual union as a sacred act that mirrored the fertility of the earth itself. Young couples were blessed by elders who spoke openly about the spiritual dimensions of physical intimacy, that it was a gift to be honored, that it created bonds beyond the physical, that it was a doorway to understanding the creative power of the universe. Among the Lakota, there was a sacred ceremony that involved teaching young people about the spiritual responsibilities of sexual intimacy. The teaching wasn't, "Don't do it until marriage," or "Sex is dirty." It was, "Sexual energy is powerful medicine. It can create life. It can bond people. It can heal or harm. Like all powerful medicine, it requires wisdom, respect, and right intention." Young women were taught that their bodies were sacred, that their sexuality was their own, that they had the right to say yes or no. Young men were taught that sexual conquest was not manhood, that true strength meant honoring a woman's boundaries, that sexual connection without emotional responsibility was spiritual immaturity. The ceremony was led by grandmothers who spoke with frankness. One grandmother spoke about her own sexual awakening, about how she'd learned to understand her desire not as something to suppress, but as a force to understand and direct wisely. "Your body knows things your mind hasn't learned yet," she said. "It knows attraction. It knows pleasure. It knows desire. These are gifts from the Creator." Then another grandmother spoke about responsibilities. "What you do with your body affects your spirit. Who you join with not just physically but energetically. Choose wisely." The young women asked questions without embarrassment, about pleasure, about conception and prevention, about what to expect, about how to communicate with partners. The grandmothers answered everything honestly, with neither shame nor titillation, simply with understanding that knowledge protected young people better than ignorance ever could. Compare this to how many modern people learn about sex, through fragmented, shame-based education, through peers who know little more than they do, through pornography that teaches performance rather than connection. The Native American approach was communal sex education, grounded in spiritual understanding and practical wisdom. Now let's talk about something even more challenging. How some tribes understood gender and sexuality as more fluid than the rigid binaries imposed by European colonization. Among many Native American cultures, there was recognition of people who embodied both masculine and feminine qualities, who lived outside the gender binary. These people were called by different names: Nadlihi among the Navajo, Winkte among the Lakota, Lamana among the Zuni. Modern pan-Indian term is Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit people were often considered sacred, gifted with special spiritual insight, precisely because they didn't fit into simple categories. Many became medicine people, matchmakers, ceremonial leaders, or mediators. When European colonizers arrived with rigid Christian sexual morality, they couldn't comprehend this fluidity. They labeled Two-Spirit people as sinners, perverts. They forced conformity to binary gender roles. They created shame where none had existed before. This history matters because it reveals something crucial. The rigid sexual and gender categories many people think of as natural or traditional are actually relatively recent impositions, replacing far more flexible and humane indigenous systems. The Native American integration of sexuality and spirituality wasn't perfect. Different tribes had different approaches, but broadly, there was wisdom in refusing to split the sacred from the sensual, in treating the body as a site of holiness rather than sin. Not every story about love among Native American tribes has a resolution. Some heartbreaks were too deep. Some wounds were inflicted by forces larger than individual relationships. Some love stories were destroyed by the same colonization that tried to destroy the cultures themselves. In 1879, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School opened in Pennsylvania. It became the model for dozens of boarding schools. The stated mission: kill the Indian, save the man. Children were forcibly removed from their families, sometimes as young as 5 or 6. They were forbidden to speak their languages, practice their religions, or maintain their cultural identities. Boys' hair was cut, traditional clothing was burned, names were changed to English. And crucially, they were taught that their native ways of understanding relationship, courtship, gender and sexuality were savage and shameful. Let me introduce you to Nashoba, a Choctaw boy taken to boarding school at age 7 in 1892. He knew only the warm, communal world of his village, where love was expressed openly, where physical affection was constant. At boarding school, affection was forbidden. Touch meant punishment. Emotional expression was weakness. Nashoba was beaten for crying. He was beaten for trying to speak Choctaw. He was beaten for trying to comfort a younger child. Over the years, something inside Nashoba hardened. The open-hearted boy became a young man who couldn't express emotion, couldn't accept affection, couldn't trust intimacy. When he eventually married, he chose a woman from his tribe, hoping to return to the ways he'd been torn from. But he couldn't. The damage was too deep. He'd learned to associate emotional expression with punishment. His wife tried to create the kind of warm, affectionate partnership she'd seen modeled, but Nashoba couldn't respond. He was emotionally frozen. This is what cultural genocide looks like in intimate terms. This is what happens when you invade the most personal spaces, the ways people love and connect and raise children. Multiply Nashoba's story by hundreds of thousands. Multiple generations of native children removed from families, taught that their traditional ways were shameful, traumatized into emotional shutdown. The effects cascade through generations. Children who never learned healthy attachment patterns can't teach their own children what they never received. Among many Native communities today, there are epidemic levels of domestic violence and relationship dysfunction, not because Native people are inherently violent, but because colonization specifically targeted the intimate sphere. But here's where the story starts to turn. In recent decades, there's been a powerful movement among Native communities to reclaim traditional knowledge about relationships. Elders who still remember the old ways have been teaching younger generations. Traditional courtship practices are being revived. Two-spirit identities are being reclaimed and honored. Let me tell you about Ayana and Chayton, a young Navajo couple in their 20s, living on the Navajo Nation Reservation in 2018. Both grew up in families marked by addiction, domestic violence, and intergenerational trauma. Both could have easily replicated those patterns, but they made a different choice. They sought out elders who still knew the traditional Navajo teachings about Hozo, about balance, about respect, about partnership. They learned that in traditional Navajo culture, a healthy marriage wasn't about romantic feeling alone. It was about being good relatives to each other, about contributing to the community together. When they married, it was a traditional Navajo ceremony. Their marriage became an act of cultural reclamation, a refusal to let colonization have the final word. This is happening across Native America, a deliberate return to traditional frameworks. Young Native people are learning languages their grandparents were punished for speaking. They're participating in ceremonies their great-grandparents practiced in secret. And they're discovering something powerful. The old ways still work. The wisdom that guided human relationships for thousands of years is still relevant, still profound, still capable of healing what was broken. So what do we do with all this? What does the Native American understanding of love and desire offer us today, living in a world of dating apps, hookup culture, and epidemic loneliness? More than you might think. Let's start with patience in courtship. The Lakota flute courtship that lasted months. The Cherokee blanket courtship that required emotional connection before physical intimacy. All of this runs counter to modern speed, the pressure to decide quickly, the expectation of sexual intimacy by the third date, the algorithmic matching that pretends you can assess compatibility from a profile. What if we slowed down? What if we required ourselves to really know someone before escalating intimacy? The principle underneath, that love worth having is worth waiting for, that desire deepens when allowed to build gradually, that the best partnerships are built on more than initial attraction. That principle is timeless. Then there's honesty. The Iroquois woman who told her husband about an attraction to someone else. The Comanche couple who confronted jealousy directly. Compare this to modern relationships where people hide attractions, lie about feelings, avoid difficult conversations, and stay in dead relationships for years. What if we adopted the Native American standard of radical honesty in relationships? Not brutal honesty used as a weapon, but loving honesty grounded in respect. This would require emotional courage. The courage to say, I'm feeling attracted to someone else and I need to talk about what that means. The courage to say, I'm not happy and we need to address it or end it. The lie destroys trust more than the truth ever could. The dead marriage, stayed in for appearance's sake, harms both partners more than an honest divorce. Then there's the community dimension. The Native American understanding that love isn't just individual, that relationships affect the broader social fabric. We've lost this almost entirely. Modern relationships are hyper-individualized, just two people isolated, trying to meet all each other's needs. What if we recreated some form of community involvement, not controlling, but supportive and wise? Imagine if young couples had access to mentoring from elders who've been married for decades. Imagine if struggling relationships could turn to community mediators. Imagine if divorce was a community-supported transition. Now let's address the integration of sexuality and spirituality. The Native American refusal to treat the body as fallen, desire as sinful, or pleasure as shameful. What would it mean to approach sexuality the way many native tribes did, as powerful medicine that requires wisdom, as a sacred act of connection? The Native American teaching that sexual energy is creative power, that intimacy creates bonds beyond the physical, that partners owe each other mutuality. These teachings feel radically relevant. Let's talk about gender. The Native American recognition of two-spirit people, the understanding that gender and sexuality exist on spectrums rather than rigid binaries. Many Native American cultures navigated gender complexity with more grace than modern Western culture has managed. The Native understanding that some people embody both masculine and feminine energies, that this was a gift rather than a disorder. This challenges current transphobia and homophobia at their roots. Finally, let's talk about healing historical trauma in relationships. Native communities are doing this work now, creating programs that address historical trauma, teaching traditional practices, building cultural containers that blend ancestral wisdom with contemporary understanding. This work is relevant beyond Native communities. All of us carry intergenerational trauma. All of us learned dysfunctional patterns from parents who were themselves wounded. The Native American approach to healing, which is communal, ceremonial, grounded in cultural reclamation, offers insights for all of us trying to break cycles of dysfunction. So here's my final question. Which piece of Native American wisdom about love and desire speaks to your life right now? Is it the patience of the flute courtship, the honesty of confronting attraction, the community support, the integration of sexuality and spirituality, the acceptance of gender diversity, the commitment to healing trauma? Take one piece and try it. Slow down your next relationship. Be radically honest with your current partner. Seek out mentoring from elders. Approach sexuality as sacred. Work on healing your own inherited wounds. You don't have to do everything, you just have to start somewhere. Because the truth is, we need this wisdom desperately. Our epidemic of loneliness, our relationship dysfunction, our sexual confusion, all of it suggests we've lost our way. The Native American approaches to love and desire aren't the only answers, but they're profound answers, tested over thousands of years, grounded in deep understanding of human nature. They got destroyed by colonization, but they're not dead. They're being reclaimed, revived, adapted to modern life by Native people committed to cultural survival. And the rest of us can learn from this reclamation. We can study these traditions with respect, apply their principles in our own lives, and acknowledge the debt we owe to indigenous wisdom. What love and desire meant in Native American tribes wasn't one thing. It was hundreds of things, diverse as the hundreds of distinct tribal cultures. But underneath that diversity were common threads: respect, patience, honesty, community, the sacred nature of connection. These threads can guide us now, if we're willing to learn. Before we close, I need you to do something. If you watched this far, it's because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. And if this resonated with you, if you learned something, if you felt something, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge what you thought you knew, because these stories matter. These wisdoms matter. The Native Americans who developed sophisticated approaches to love and desire over thousands of years, they matter. Their knowledge was nearly destroyed, but it survived. And it's calling to us now, offering exactly what we need: a way to love better, to desire more wisely, to build relationships that honor both individual truth and collective well-being. The question is, are we ready to listen?